Thank you, Trio. That's a great way to start a new season of discipleship, isn't it? A small group ministry. In Jesus' name, we press on. I was thinking as they were singing the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus gives the commission and he sandwiches that commission in between two promises. There's the promise of his power. He said, all power is given to me in heaven and in earth. And then he gave the commission. And then he gave us the promise of presence. Amen. I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. 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 So it's been a great weekend. I have enjoyed being with those of you who were able to be there at the discipleship conference. And I benefited from being there myself, and just love what I hear and see and observe is happening here at Frankfort Bible Holiness Church. It's exciting. And we're going to conclude tonight by talking about discipleship and a disciple-making church. How can we be a disciple-making church? Well, I want to talk about the model that Jesus gives us, but before I do, imagine this. Let's imagine that the story of Jesus went something like this. Jesus celebrates his 30th birthday. He leaves Nazareth and goes down to Jerusalem. He rents a building, cleans it up, moves in some chairs, some other necessary furnishings. And he hangs a sign out front that says, church. He posts the service times, careful to include the words at the bottom of the sign, everyone welcome, with an exclamation point. And this is how he begins his church. A church which he promises I will build this church, and all the powers of hell will not be able to conquer it. Each week at the appointed service time, he shows up, he opens the doors, and he hopes that people in the city will see the building, that they'll see the sign, especially the everyone welcome with the exclamation point, and that they will come inside maybe for one of the services. And so when they do, some of them did come, and when they do, Jesus leads them in singing some psalms. He leads them in a prayer. And he preaches a sermon about God. At the end, they get up and leave, and Jesus greets them, the few who came. Thank you for coming today. Come back next week. And next week, at the appointed time on the service, which says everyone welcome with the exclamation point, some do return, but some don't. And there are a few new faces in the little group, but it's really about the same number of people who come inside the church. And when they enter, they nod to each other. Hello? How was your week? Good? Well, that's good. Then they take their seat. And when they do, Jesus leads them in singing some of the psalms. And he leads them in a prayer. And he preaches a sermon about God. At the end, they get up to leave, and Jesus greets the few who came. Thank you for coming today. Come back next week. And they go home. Next week, at the scheduled service time, again, a few gather in. It's a mix of mostly those who attended previously. One new man. A couple of women aren't here today. Will they come back? Everyone wonders. They seemed interested. The service begins. Jesus leads them in singing some of the psalms, leads them in a prayer, and preaches a sermon about God. In about an hour, it's over. The small crowd stand to leave. They nod to the few others who are also present. Hi, how was your week? Good? Well, that's good. Have a nice week. See you next time. And they go home. Jesus straightens the chairs, blows out the candles, locks the door on the little building called the church. This is the church in Jerusalem. They have a building. They have a sign with service times posted. And oh yes, the everyone welcome at the bottom with the exclamation point. It's clearly visible on the sign, and hopefully all who pass by will see it. And so each week they meet for church. The few who are present smile to one another, nod, hi, how was your week? Good? Well, that's good. And in the service, Jesus leads them in singing some of the Psalms, and he leads them in a prayer, and he preaches a sermon about God, and at the end they get up to leave, and Jesus greets the few who came. Thank you for coming today, and have a good week, and come back next time. And they go home. You starting to get how this church is going in Jerusalem? Now I got a question for us. If this had been the model for church, how likely is it that we would have the incredible book of Acts about and in which we read the birth of the church? We do read the remarkable accounts of the church in Acts, which Jesus began in his ministry in the Gospels, but in his wisdom, he structured it differently than what I have imagined with you in rather boring fashion, actually. Jesus, in his wisdom, structured it that the church would be formed by bringing people, very diverse people, together in growing and supportive personal relationships with one another. And they come together for the purpose of encouraging one another in a faith relationship with Jesus Christ. That's how Jesus structured church. The focus of our weekend has been on discipleship. You know, the word discipleship is not found in the Bible. And somebody just said, yes, I'm off the hook. But the New Testament, I think, is committed to it. I mean, if by discipleship we mean the process by which one becomes a disciple, then discipleship is in fact the main theme of the New Testament, yes, but even of the Bible, really. The Apostle John summarized, I think, the purpose of discipleship and of all that we do in church, in the kingdom of God. He summarized it like this. He said, that they know you, this is quoting Jesus, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. I think that's the goal of all of discipleship. So discipleship, the process by which one becomes a disciple. But what is a disciple? The first time we read that word disciple is in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 5. It's the verses right before the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:1. Seeing the crowds, Jesus went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples, first time we see that word, his disciples came to him. Now, maybe just a little background about this matter of disciples. Jesus was not the first one to have disciples. Did you know that? Yeah, he did not introduce this master-disciple model. John the Baptist had disciples. We read in Matthew 11:17 about that. Disciples, I don't know if it originated, but it was very prominent in the synagogues of the region of Galilee. Very prominent model for teaching and instructing and mentoring young people. They would have the synagogue in these towns and little villages in Galilee. And of course, this is where Jesus grew up, in Nazareth of Galilee. And these synagogues would be the very center of the community in these Jewish places. The synagogue was where the community came together. It's where they met for worship every Sabbath day. There they would possibly have a scroll. The Torah maybe would be read and would be expounded upon. It was at the synagogue where their education of their boys and girls would take place. The rabbi, who was like the pastor of the synagogue, he would be the teacher and instructor for the boys and girls in a school called Beth Sefer, and that would go up till about ages 12 or 13, at which point some of the girls, many of the girls would actually marry, and they would, imagine that, they would marry and they would start families of their own. The boys would likely begin to follow in their father's footsteps, and they would begin to learn the family trade. Maybe it was an olive grove that they raised and provided olives, or maybe it was masonry, or some were fishermen, obviously, around the Sea of Galilee. But there were some boys, usually boys, who would continue with the rabbi in another level of schooling called Beth Midrash. And possibly this would be the beginning of discipleship. They would go deeper in the scriptures, and they would begin to listen to the debates of rabbis, and visiting rabbis would lecture. And they were in school studying the scriptures and learning about God, while their peers who had gone to Beth Sefer school with them were married or learning the family trade and beginning their own businesses or careers. But from the school of Beth Midrash, some of these boys would want to go deeper still. And they had a passion to know more. And so they would find a rabbi, and they would observe this rabbi. And if it was a rabbi that they felt like they wanted to learn from, they would inquire about the possibility of being his disciple. This happened a lot in this culture of the first century. Some would be received by the rabbi and welcomed to be disciples, and some would not be. He would quiz them. It was his decision. It depended on the rabbi accepting you. Jesus came on the scene, and he began to incorporate this model of rabbi-disciple. But he was different. And I'm thankful that he was different. Because unlike the boys who wanted to be disciples of a certain rabbi, who would go to the rabbi and say, "Can I be your disciple?" Jesus didn't find promising boys. Jesus found common people. He found fishermen who'd already learned. They'd bypassed Beth Midrash. They didn't feel like they had it in them. And they'd started learning with Zebedee, their father, how to fish. You know, it's likely that James and John weren't 40-year-old men when Jesus called them. Did you know that? They could have been quite young, actually, late teens. Jesus actually sought out some rejected people, like a tax collector, Matthew. Jesus took risks with extreme people, zealots, like Simon the Zealot. Or Judas Iscariot, one he knew would betray him. But he invited these to be his disciples. But not just them. Here's the good news, all of us. He invites all of us to be his disciples. Amen. Listen as I read Mark 8:34. And calling the crowd to himself, Jesus, with his disciples, Jesus said to them, "If anyone would come." I love it when Mark includes the phrase, "and calling the crowd," with his disciples. Jesus said, if any of you that want to come after me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Amen. So a disciple then is anyone who hears the invitation and receives Jesus' invitation to know him, to begin a relationship with him. If you're saved tonight, you're a disciple. Right. You're a disciple of Jesus. But it's more than that. I want to discover with you 4 aspects of being a disciple. In Mark 8:34, I just referenced it, where Jesus said, and this is where we learn the first aspect of being a disciple. Jesus called the crowd to himself, and he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Follow me. The Greek word there, akolutheo, is the word follower. It literally means to follow someone, not just occasionally, but to begin to accompany them or to join them as a disciple. And when Jesus used that word, they knew what it meant to follow as a disciple. Because while Peter and Andrew, or James and John, were learning fishing from their father Zebedee, there were other boys that they had gone to Beth Sefer with who were now learning and following a rabbi. And that was their life. That's what they did for their career, if you will. It's kind of like going to Bible school, maybe. So they were followers. So a disciple is a follower of Jesus. That's the first aspect. It's not just someone who believes in Jesus. Jesus doesn't invite you to believe in him. He invites you to follow him. The devils believe and tremble. He wants us to follow him. So a disciple is a follower, and in following, there is learning. That's the second aspect. A disciple is not only a follower, a disciple is a learner. A disciple is a learner. I love Alistair Begg. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Alistair Begg, pastor, Cleveland, or Akron area, I guess it is, Akron, Cleveland, Northeast Ohio. I just love his accent. He's from Scotland. And I just envy people like Alistair Begg and Ravi Zacharias. When they stand to speak, they have that accent. And I just think it gives them an edge, Brother Maury. I think it really does. I think, I grew up in Tennessee, Brother Fulton, and it didn't help me at all with my accent. I've tried to get away from that a little bit, but even today, my wife was helping me with some pronunciations on certain words. Doesn't help me. People listen to Ravi Zacharias and Alistair Begg, and they think they're intelligent. And they listen to my accent and think, where did he come from? He's a hayseed. But Alistair Begg's little tagline is, at the beginning of his broadcast is, the learning is for living. I like that. The learning is for living. And really, disciples have to be learners. If we're really a disciple in the biblical sense, we have to be a learner. The first time we read the word disciple, as I told you, was in Matthew 5, verse 1. But I want you to look at the verse again, and also we're going to add verse 2 here. Jesus, seeing the crowds, went up on the mountain. When he sat down, his disciples came to him. And here it is, Jesus opened his mouth and he taught them. Jesus taught them. The word disciple there is the word that means a learner that is a pupil. So a learner, a disciple is not only one who just follows, who hangs out with, who spends time with, but a disciple is one who's focused on learning. Methetes, that's what it means, a learner, a learner. So a disciple is a learner, and in following, there is learning, and in learning, there is the third aspect, imitating. A disciple is an imitator of Jesus. Being a disciple of Jesus means imitating him and really those who follow his example. Jesus said this in Luke 6:40. A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. What's he saying? He's saying that the disciples are imitators. Now, the word disciple is used, as you know, and we've already referenced some of those, in the Gospels, and it's also used in the book of Acts. But it's not used in the epistles. The word is not as common. Once you leave Acts, it's not the word of choice. But you know what is the word of choice? Imitate or imitator. It's used throughout the rest of the New Testament. Let me just give you a couple of reference verses here. Ephesians 5:1, the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians at Ephesus, and he said, "Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children." Right. Imitators. You know, children naturally imitate their parents. I remember my little boy, Stuart, who's not little, he's taller than I am now, and he's a freshman at GBS. He's studying for the ministry. I couldn't be more thankful. But I remember him getting his lawnmower out, a little plastic lawnmower. You remember those little plastic lawnmowers? The only sound they made was one of the wheels had a little clicker in it. It'd click, 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 while they'd push it along. And he'd try to stay with me. He wanted to imitate his dad mowing the lawn. There were a few years after that, he didn't want to imitate me mowing the lawn anymore. And I had to instruct him to mow the lawn. But children like to imitate their parents. They like to watch them, see them, and begin to do what they do. And that's really the idea. Imitate. In the same way, we must imitate Jesus. Another verse, 1 Corinthians 11:1. This is use of the word imitate. Be imitators of me, Paul said, as I am of Christ. That's the word. We're called not only to imitate Christ, I would tell you, but here's this matter of discipleship and discipling. We're also to imitate others who faithfully are following Christ. The New Testament is, I could give you lots of verses with that word imitate, where that concept is really strong. I won't take that time to do that. But let me give you one more in Philippians 3:17. Brothers, Paul says, join in imitating me. Now, he's talked other places about imitating God and imitating Christ. Here he says, join in imitating me, and listen, keep your eyes on those, so other people beside me, who walk according to the example you have in us. So lest we think it's only the apostles who were qualified to be imitated, Paul calls us to imitate all who walk according to a godly example. So this word imitate, it does a great job of expressing, I think, the heart of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, and that is being like him. There's one more aspect of a disciple. A disciple is a duplicator or a disciple maker. When Jesus called his first 4 disciples, Matthew 4, verses 18 and 19, he's walking by the Sea of Galilee. He sees 2 brothers, Simon, or called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, and they're fishing. They're casting nets into the sea. They were fishermen. You remember what Jesus said to them? He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Or I will show you, if you follow me, if you become my disciple, I will show you how to fish for people. You will learn to do, boys, if you follow me, you will learn to do exactly what I'm doing or what I'm about to do. And so they leave their fishing and they set out to follow Jesus that day. And look at the end verses of Matthew 4, because as they start to follow Jesus, he immediately begins teaching them by example about fishing for people or making disciples, investing in others' lives, bringing them to God. He begins to teach them what to do. Notice verse 23 of Matthew 4, right after he's called these guys. It says, Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and affliction among the people. I have highlighted 5 words in that verse, and it's this: Jesus went among the people. That's a little bit different than that imaginary church Jesus comes down from Nazareth and sets up in Jerusalem. That little building that he cleans up and puts a few chairs in, puts the service times out front with the quotation, everyone welcome, with the exclamation point at the bottom, and just hoping people will show up. And those who do, hey, good to see you. Have a good week? Good. Well, have a nice week. See you next week. Jesus went among the people. As we read the gospel accounts, he was forever in and among and out with people. Everywhere Jesus went, these disciples that he had called, they followed him, and what they observed was Jesus living out his stated mission. The Son of Man has come to seek and save those who are lost. That's what his passion was. And for better than 3 years, they followed him, first to this village and then to that one. And they learned from him and they began to be like him. And at the end of his earthly mission, he gathered them around him. Remember this? And he commissioned them to duplicate what he had taught them with these words. Last words he ever said to them in Matthew. He started Matthew 4, that day by the Sea of Galilee. Hey, boys, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. For better than 3 years, they've done it. And now he's going to heaven. And he says, all right, duplicate it. Go and make disciples. Because the ultimate goal of discipleship is to become just like Jesus. Disciples follow Jesus. Disciples learn from Jesus. Disciples imitate Jesus. Disciples duplicate what Jesus did. That's got to be the goal of every discipleship program. That's got to be our goal. And really, I want to touch on a couple of things, and then I've got a lot of other notes here, but I'll just quit. It's time to quit. Some of us have had a long weekend, and I'm kind of churched out a little bit. Did I just say that? Well, it's true. I'm tired. I mean, even Jesus said, come apart and rest. That's good preaching, Jesus. I want us to be careful that we don't ever get to the place that we don't feel like we ourselves need to be being discipled. At Village Park Church, we defined a disciple as one who is intentionally being with Jesus and increasingly becoming like Jesus. Now, we put that in present tense. We didn't say one who spent time with Jesus so that he could become like Jesus, because that means you do it for a little while and then you're done. We say one who is intentionally being with Jesus. That means today I'm going to be with Jesus, tomorrow I'm going to be with Jesus, next week I'm going to be with Jesus. To increasingly become like Jesus, which the great apostle Paul said is really the focus. He said, we are, I got the verse somewhere, but as I said, I got a lot of notes. Anyway, he said that we are to be Romans 8:29. The purpose of God is that we are being conformed to the image of Christ. Amen. That's what every disciple is to be. Be continually being conformed to the image of Christ. Now, I just got a confession for you. Oh, he's done so much in my life. Praise God. And he's doing so much in my life. Even this morning, he tweaked me a little bit on the platform while I was worshiping. He said, you need to take care of this in your life. And I said, yes, Jesus, I'll do it. And I raised my hand while we were singing a phrase that I needed to incorporate into my life. And he tweaked me a little bit. I just confess to you, I'm not totally conformed to the image of Jesus yet. You okay? I hope you're okay, because I don't know you too well, but I do not want to insult you, but I'm pretty sure you're not totally like Jesus yet. Though a lot of you are much closer than I am, I'm sure. So if that's the goal, then that means discipleship is not just for new converts or new believers. Discipleship is for all of us. It's for you, it's for me. No matter how long I've walked with the Lord, it's for all of us. So let me encourage you to not only be discipling, but be being discipled. And I wanted to quit, but I made a promise, and so I got to keep it. I made a promise to you, didn't I, that I would talk about something tonight. I don't know that I can prove to you that this is Jesus' model of discipleship, but I do believe it's something that I could recommend to you, and it's something that God has asked me to do in my life, and it's been and is incredibly beneficial for me. I'm going to suggest to you that there are 3 levels on which discipleship can really have its full potential or effectiveness in our lives. So I believe that I, as a new believer, need to be discipled. Many of us probably were not. If you grew up in churches similar to what I grew up in, good church, but we didn't disciple people much, unfortunately. So I think we need to be discipled, but once we have been discipled and we're maturing in our faith and we've got some understanding and some growth, we need to then be discipling someone else. But I think we also need to be receiving discipleship at the same time on a couple of levels. So let me see if I can explain it to you, and I feel like right now I'm not doing a great job communicating that to you. So let me say it this way, 3 levels. There is me being discipled by a more mature believer. I think the example of that would be Paul, and Paul being discipled by Barnabas. Paul was discipled by Barnabas in his early infancy stages of faith. You can read about that in Acts 9, chapter 11. And that's always where discipleship begins. It begins there, receiving discipleship. But I also think that once I get to a certain place, I want to be discipling others and bringing them along. And so that kind of starts that process all over, where now I'm helping someone else who's new to the faith. So I'm discipling someone maybe under me, not as mature as I am in the faith. An example of that would be, I believe, the Apostle Paul, who disciples Timothy. He actually refers to Timothy, he says, as my son in the faith. He first met him at Acts chapter 16, and he took him with him, and he discipled Timothy. That word's not used, but it's obvious that's what happens, and he's continuing to do that as 1 Timothy opens up, chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to Timothy, my true child in the faith. He's discipling him. So you have the Barnabas discipling Paul as a young believer, Paul discipling Timothy as a young believer. But I think there's a model of being discipled on a kind of a peer level. And I would give you the example of Paul and Silas of doing that. I looked at it earlier this week. Acts 15 through Acts chapter 17, the phrase Paul and Silas occurs 7 times. They were kind of ministry peers. And I believe they held one another accountable. They encouraged one another. They prayed and sang. And who said in the Philippian jail that night, hey, let's sing. Sing? Yeah, let's sing. Let's praise God. And so they started singing. And the church was born in Philippi because of that singing in jail. And they encouraged and they supported and they boosted one another. Hey guys, I believe a lot of people who started out to follow Jesus would be still following Jesus today if we had the mindset and the idea that, hey, even though I've been walking with the Lord for a while, I still need to be encouraged and supported and mentored and discipled. So here's how I do it. I spend time every week discipling men who are younger, mostly in age, sometimes less mature maybe in faith than me. I have several that I do discipleship with. But then once a month, I get together with, I haven't asked if I can say it, I just need a little permission here. Is it okay? All right. I get together every month with Dr. Fry, your pastor. And we, on a peer level, encourage one another on a monthly basis. Try to. It's great. It's so beneficial to me. And then I have an older gentleman that I meet with once a month. He doesn't even go to my church. He's a retired Christian businessman who pours into my life. I mean, I love Jeff. He shows up at the breakfast place we go to, and he's got his Bible. And I know Jeff's been praying for me all month. And he's got his Bible, and he got these piercing blue eyes, snow white hair, just a kind face. Reminds me of Jesus. And he looks into me, he's like, how you doing, Pastor Duane? And we talk, and I can talk confidentially. And I've shared a lot of things with him. And he says, well, you know what? Earlier today, or earlier this week, I felt like God put this, and it always, always, always fits what I need. And he opens up the scriptures, and he reads it to me, and he'll say, what if you did this? And I am so blessed to have that happening in my life. The other thing that I would suggest, and I hope I communicated that clearly, maybe my example of how it works in my life was helpful to you. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to quit. I think the first priority of those who have families in discipling is really called parenting. Oh God, don't let me disciple everybody else and not help my children follow him. Deuteronomy says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words I command you today shall be on your heart, but you shall teach them diligently to your children. And here's how you do that. You take them to Frankfurt Bible Holiness Church. At least 2 services a week if you can get there. Make sure they're in Sunday school, join your church, and go to VBS. Oh, that's important. That's good. But he said, you shall teach them diligently. And you shall talk to them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise up, and you bind them as a sign on your hand and between your eyes, and you write them on the doorpost. That means whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, when you're home, when you're abroad, you are teaching and discipling and mentoring those kids. Dads, let me encourage you to do something. You're probably doing it. You look like great dads. Let me encourage you to start this. Once a month at least. Take those kids, that kid, do it individually. Take him out. Chips and salsa. Get water with lemon if you're on a budget. Actually, if you pretend like you're going to order, you can get chips and salsa free. My wife is crawling under the seat over there. No, you got to pay for that. That's not good discipleship. Ice cream, and sitting over chips and salsa. Honey, how's things going? Let's talk about school. What do you like? Have any trouble? How's your relationship with Jesus? How's your devotion? Where are you reading right now? What's God showing you in the Word? Start young. Start really young. See, I believe that the goal of parenting is to be so involved and connected with my kids that I have their permission at the next season of life to be an influencer in their life. And if I don't stay connected at this season, I won't get that permission at the next season. It's work, but it's so worth it. Take that boy, take that girl out. Dads, we're the spiritual leaders. Amen. Let's don't leave this to our wife, our mom, their mom. No, let's do it. Moms, you can do it too. But at every season, do that. And you say, well, I've got kids that are grown, got kids of their own now. It's never, I'm telling you, my goal as a parent is to be so involved in my kids' life at every level that I get permission at the next level. I got 3 of them in college now. And they'll tell you every time they come home, I connect with them. I'll take them out for, I can't afford it a lot of times. You go out to eat in Westfield, Carmel area, they feel like we're all rich over there, and we're not. But they all charge rich prices. But it's worth the investment. How's school going? How's your dating relationships going? You interested in anybody? Anybody I approve of? No, I don't. And then when they got kids of their own, when they come home or when I go see them or when I call them, I want to be discipling them. Amen. It doesn't stop, guys. The reason is it's kind of that model of Paul. Follow me as I follow Christ. That's a great parenting verse. Because I've lived a little longer than she has. And I've been places in life that she's never been yet, but she's going. And that experience and that love and that care for her, I can share with her. Oh, of all things, let's disciple our kids. Amen. Well, I had a great closing line. Where is it? Here it is. A discipling church will always be, this is why we're going to do it. A discipling church will always be a growing church. Growing in faith, growing in folks, growing in facilities. If you're growing in folks, you got to grow in facilities. And you're going to grow in favor with God. He loves that. Thank you for letting me be here tonight. I've so enjoyed it. I hope it's been in any way helpful, I pray. And Pastor Fry, we'll turn it to you. If we want questions or discussion, you can answer them and ask him.